Oh, hello there. So glad you guys could stop by. I just got the fire going, so I thought it might be the perfect time to get comfy and share some stories with my favorite people. Welcome to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get started with another great series of spooky tales. Sometimes it's hard to have good relationships with our siblings. There's some underlying animosity, something we can't quite give up from childhood. Can't relate there. I have a wonderful relationship with my younger brother. I know he listens sometimes, so if he's listening today, hello, David. I hope you're doing well. However, sometimes these are problems that persist into adulthood, and sometimes you find they come out at the worst possible time, much like the subject of today's video. So let's look into a letter left by the original poster to his big brother.
March 3rd. I've always kind of hated my brother. Well, hate's a strong word. I just always hated how easy everything was for him. He's 2 years older than me, but everything just comes so easily to him. In high school, he was in ROTC, taking courses in criminal justice, so he could get a leg up on his law enforcement career. He had a string of friends and girlfriends and made his high school years amazing. He never seemed to study, always retaining what he needed for tests, and finished his high school a half a year early with a nearly perfect GPA. He didn't need to. He could have just joined the police academy right out of high school, but he chose to join the Army for 4 years, saying it was his duty to his country. He served as an MP and later as a base investigator for base-related crimes. When he got out, he was practically ready to start police work already. Now he's a hotshot detective, while the only thing I got out of high school was an unfavorable comparison to my perfect older brother and too many bullies to count. But it looks like his streak's coming to an end now, while this new string of murders keeps piling up. They're calling him the West End Cannibal, and his crimes are truly horrific. He meets women online, pretty common in this day and age, and then he murders them in their own homes. He cuts them open, sometimes stealing their organs, and they found bites and burns on them as well. The missing organs lead them to believe that he's eating them, but they don't really seem to have any proof. My brother talks ceaselessly about this guy during our weekly meetups to have a beer and talk about life. This is something he insists on, since it gives him an opportunity to talk about himself. My work is so boring that no one in their right mind would want to hear about it. Very little happens to me that would make anyone want to hear about my life. Probably why I'm still single. The crux of it is, my brother told me last week, as he sat on his stool at O'Malley's, is that I don't think the bites belong to him. We found dental records from 3 different sets of teeth, and one of them came back with dental records on a recently deceased person. So what, he grave robs too? I asked, not really interested, but wanting to hear him flounder. The guy's still buried, though. We exhumed his body. His wife was right pissed, and we found his teeth intact. We're chasing our tails here. This guy hasn't given us a lot to work with, and his body count is nearly in the double digits now. I pretended to be speculative, but really I was laughing into my beer at him. My perfect brother, so confident and sure of himself, was being thwarted by some nobody. I had sat on this stool for years, just waiting for a story like this. I know it sounds petty, but I like to see him unsure of himself. It makes me realize that he's just as human as I am. March 12th. There were another 2 murders this week. He called me this time, not having time for a beer as the department scrambled to figure this out. I just don't get it, he said, and his voice sounded tired. This guy's a genuine ghost. We have him picking up his first victim on Tinder, but his second victim was some random woman from a bar. Jesus, but he really did a number on her. He slashed off one of her breasts. We found it in the corner. All of her organs were just strewn about the bathroom. We had kind of thought that maybe he was selling them or something, but now he's not even taking them with him. He's just dismembering them and leaving them sitting around. I pretended to listen, cleaning up so I could get home as I prepared to leave my job. But my face likely looked like a kid on Christmas morning. He was really worried about this. He was really worried that he couldn't solve this case. I remember a year ago I watched something similar happen, feeling that this would be the moment of his failure, and wanting to see it. When he caught the guy, a middle-aged cubicle jockey who was murdering prostitutes instead of buying a Jaguar like everyone else who has a midlife crisis, I had watched him crow about it in the press conference and tried not to puke. If pride came before a fall, then his fall was a long time coming. I don't know what I'm going to do, bro. I've been sleeping like shit. I think Carol is starting to suspect that I'm cheating on her. Are you? I asked, ready to put some more arrows in my quiver. No, of course not. I made a note of his quick dismissal, doubting it and saving it for later. But she sees these long hours and jumps to conclusions. I'm out all night pounding the pavement, going over evidence, so I must be out having some kind of affair or sleeping with someone at my office. I can't understand it. I've always taken care of her and the kids. I don't know where all this is coming from. Are you on the job now? Yeah, we're driving to a scene now. I'm hoping like hell it's just a copycat. Someone who's a little sloppier than this guy. We tried to keep this out of the news, but when 10 girls get cut up like this, it's almost impossible to keep quiet. I need to catch this guy. My reputation's on the line here. My boss, I could hear him reach up and rub the bridge of his nose, is really coming down on me. We're here. I gotta go. Be safe out there, little brother. There's a lot of crazies out there. I smirked as he hung up, glad to hear he was worried. Maybe this would end his career. Let him see how us normal people lived in the muck of disappointment for a while. Hadn't I lived for most of my life like that? Did my parents throw me a party or buy me a car when I finished college? Had they helped me take my state boards or paid for all kinds of test prep that I didn't need and desperately had wanted? Did they constantly talk about my perfect job and perfect family every time they called to see how I was doing? No, they didn't give a shit about me any more than he did. He just wanted a sounding board for his ideas and someone to nod and tell him, "Sure, big bro, you're so right." Maybe it was his turn to be wrong for a change. March 21st. He must be getting desperate. He actually asked me to come and take a look at a crime scene with him. I was just heading to the bar, ready to be regaled on how he could have possibly let this guy kill 13 women and still have no idea who he was, when he called me. He sounded even more frantic this time. The lack of sleep was starting to catch up with him, I could tell, and he sounded like a cornered animal. I didn't let the glee leak into my voice as I listened to him, but I don't see how he couldn't hear it. "Hey, would you mind giving me a second set of eyes?" Eyes? For what? "We found number 14 today. This guy, I swear, he doesn't seem to sleep. He just finds these women and kills them without hesitation. I don't know what to do. I'm coming up with nothing. We found more weird bites on this one, and I feel like maybe you should come take a look. I don't know, give me some insight." "Well, I'm no detective. I don't see how I could be of any help." "No, but you work at the mortuary. Maybe you can notice something on the body or notice something on the bites. All my guys are coming up with a blank here, bro. Anything you could tell me would be amazing." I contemplated telling him I was busy, but I thought better of it. Maybe I could help him out. Give him some insight. Wouldn't that just burn him righteously? He picked me up near my apartment, and we rode to the crime scene in silence. My brother kept his eyes forward, but he looked like a smack addict as he snuck glances at me. His hair was unkempt, his ordinarily smooth face covered in coarse stubble, and he shook a little as he drove. I assumed he was past coffee and he'd moved on to caffeine pills as he neared his third week of dealing with these murders. What must Carol think of her husband now that he had completely fallen apart? When we pulled up to the motel, a dingy little place near the interstate, he put a hand on my arm before I got out and looked at me darkly. "I want to thank you for agreeing to this. It's pretty brutal in there. Nothing I'm sure you're not used to, though. I'm up against it, bro. I don't know what to do." And when he said it, he started crying. "I've never had it this hard. This guy, it's like he's playing with me. He's always one step ahead of me, and my investigators, I don't know what I'm going to do if I can't solve this case. The chief is really coming down on me, and if I can't give him answers, I'm going to lose my place as squad leader. I need some help. Do you think you could help me?" I almost couldn't hold my smile. He wanted my help? This was like Christmas and New Year's and losing my virginity rolled all into one. My perfect brother wanted my help. I could just freeze it and eat it. It was so sweet. I agreed, patting his hand and telling him I would do what I could. We moved into the room, and I could see the body hadn't been moved. The room was a mess, blood everywhere, little cards with numbers on them marking organs and cast-off items. The woman's clothes were laying beside the bed, a long hypodermic needle nestled in the bedclothes beside her body. She was splayed out on the bed itself, and her dead eyes looked up at the ceiling. He let me come in, said he'd explain my footprints if it came to it, and gave me gloves just in case. We stood over the bed on opposite sides, my brother looking ready to pop as I assessed the crime scene with my untrained eye. We got a tip-off about an hour ago. Guy called ahead and had the room key waiting at the desk. He sent the girl in to get the key and used a prepaid card so they couldn't track his activity. The card had his transaction on it, and the activity notice was 2 weeks old. He activated it from a burner cell that is currently pinging from a landfill, so we assume he got rid of it. He brought the girl in, shot her full of muscle relaxer, and then he murdered her. No cameras around to see him, no clerk to ID him. No nothing. Left on foot about 2 hours ago, and left the girl in her car here. You sure it was the same guy? I asked. No, but the MO was the same. Organs removed with surgical skill, medical-grade muscle relaxer used to subdue her, no prints found anywhere, and he left her to be found like this. Didn't you say he usually kills them at their homes, though? Yeah, but she was different. Miss Melinda Carr had a husband who was at home at the time of her murder. She brought her lover here so they wouldn't get caught. Boy, did she bet on the wrong guy. I took a look around, under the bed and beside the mattress, before moving into the bathroom. I looked studiously around the motel sink and the long plastic tub. He deposited most of her organs into the sink, writing cheater on the glass in her blood before throwing her heart into the toilet. It was all still as he'd left it. The cops had moved nothing, but it certainly let people know what they were dealing with. After about a half hour of looking, I turned back and shrugged. Sorry, I don't see anything different. Did you, by chance, find out what kind of muscle relaxer the killer was using? No, he must have took it with him. Well, whoever opened her up knows his way around a set of instruments. The cuts aren't sloppy, and the organs were removed with care, but I'm guessing you had figured that out by the 14th body. Yeah, we've been canvassing databases for doctors, surgeons, even veterinarians. So far, nothing. I shrugged again. I don't know. You're the cop, not me. All I can tell you is what I see. It's fine. I'll call you a cab. I really want to stay and have a look at the scene again. Thanks for your help, though. I really appreciate it. He was talking on the phone as I left, calling that cab. As he finished, I heard his phone chirp again, and he answered it. I showed myself out, lingering by the door as a gentle sprinkle of rain began. I could hear him talking to someone through the open door, and it didn't sound work-related. He was telling someone about his hard day, and how the case was killing him, and they must have said something that made him laugh, because his next words seemed a little more upbeat. He told them where he was if they wanted to come visit him at work. I could use a shower like you wouldn't believe. Maybe I'll get a room as far away from this one as possible, and tell my wife I'm working late again. I smirked as the cab rolled up. Seems my hunch about his extramarital affair was correct. Seems my brother wasn't as perfect as everyone thought. April 4th. My brother just called me, but I doubt he'll be here on time. They found another victim, number 20 actually, and my brother was more than a little upset about it. He called me from the scene, and I could hear other cops in the background as he stepped out of the apartment. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice husky. "My apartment. Is something wrong?" He just breathed heavily for a moment as I heard the elevator open and close in the background. "Dee Dee is dead," he said with a little sob as he put his back against the wall in that way he does when news hits him hard. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't think I know who that is." She was... Look, I'm having a hard time, okay? Carol was icing me out at home. This case is really getting to me, and Dee Dee was just... She was there for me, okay? I nodded, setting the box I was carrying onto my coffee table as I went back for another one. "So you were having an affair?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah," he said, sounding like I had wrung the omission out of him. "And now this killer you can't catch has caught her. Am I mistaken?" Yeah, you have no idea how much effort it took to pretend like I didn't know her. I had to stand in that apartment, smelling her perfume, smelling her hot blood, and just... But I think I might have finally caught a lead. Oh? I set the box down next to the other one, feigning surprise. I need you to stay where you are, okay? I want to talk to you about what I may or may not know. I need to talk to you before anyone else talks to you. Can you do that? I smiled at the phone. I'll be right here when you get here. Don't worry. I'm always here for you, big brother. He hung up then, and I tossed the phone into a corner somewhere as I arranged the boxes. I wouldn't need it anymore. The noose hung over the table like a surprised voyeur. Beneath it sat boxes of evidence, trinkets I'd taken from my victims, the scalpel I'd used to dissect them, and, of course, the vial of muscle relaxer I'd taken from the scene of the very crime he had asked me to come and have a look at. I know you'll read this, big brother, so I have to thank you for the tag-along on that one. I'd been absolutely certain that you were calling me to let me know you wanted me to come to the station that day. I had just noticed that the vial was missing. A vial with my name on it and everything. I couldn't believe I had been that sloppy. Your forensics team was sure to have found it, and my little plan would be up in smoke. When you asked me to come along, I honestly thought it was a setup. When you asked me to have a look at the scene and tell you what I thought, I was sure it was a setup. When the vial was still there beside the mattress, hidden in a little notch beside the frame, I could have thanked God if I believed in anything so archaic. It was easy to put it in my pocket and continue looking around, your addled brain too fixated on your own crime scene to see me as more than a mouthpiece for what you already knew. You see, the answer should have been clear from the start. You checked the surgeons, the doctors, the veterinarians. That was a slap in the face, I can tell you. But you never thought to check the people who take fucking organs out of dead bodies every day, you moron. It was easy to stay one step ahead of you. I've been sitting on that bar stool and listening to you detail how you catch criminals for years. I had all my ducks in a row from the first murder. I was one step ahead of you before you even knew I existed. And now I will be your greatest failure. You will never catch me, big brother, because when you find this journal, I'll already be dead. This will leave you with a tricky little dilemma. You could inform your colleagues that I was the murderer this whole time. You could admit that you sat right across from me and fed me case-specific information while being unable to identify a murderer in your own family. You could tell them this, but you know that your reputation will suffer for it, and that it will be very difficult for them to trust you after this little revelation. Or you could cover it up, dispose of all the evidence that I've gathered, and pretend that the murderer just stopped killing. You could technically get the win. No more murderers means no more shame of being unable to solve them. But you would know, wouldn't you? You would know that I had beaten you, that I had won, and you would have to live with that understanding for the rest of your life. Choice is yours, big brother. I'm about to make mine right now.
Listen to those pine nuts pop. Must have been a good year for wood, I suppose. It's like listening to popcorn in the microwave, and I find myself waiting for those tiny explosions. It looks like even though Halloween's over, I've had one slip through the cracks to make it into our cozy horror, so let's give it a chance, I suppose. It's never easy to lose a parent, especially not when it puts a taint over your childhood home. But it's even weirder when the spirit of that parent seems to linger on. So, let's have a little peek, shall we, while we see what lies beyond the veil. Emily sighed as she stood in the doorway of her childhood home. She hadn't wanted to move home like this, but it seemed silly to leave the house empty after her father's death. When she opened the door, the familiar smells of childhood had assaulted her, bringing tears to her eyes as she remembered all the good times she'd had here. Christmas mornings, birthdays, nights spent on the couch as she and her dad watched whatever was on TV. The old place meant a lot to her, and she had hoped that something like this wouldn't happen for a good long time. Dad's dementia had taken him quickly, and the old house was all she had left now. Emily had lost her mother when she was young. In a way, that was a blessing. Emily had been too young to mourn her, or even to miss her, and her dad had filled the gap easily. He had never shied away from the tasks that he didn't know how to do, and to Emily, he had always been the best dad ever. When she'd gone to college the year before, she had worried about leaving him by himself, but he assured her that he could manage. When he'd gotten the diagnosis from his doctor the year before, he hadn't wanted to tell her at first. It was nothing for sure, he'd told her, and he'd have plenty of time left. Emily didn't need to worry about him, not when she had school to worry about. He downplayed it for 3 months, but Emily began to notice little changes in him that worried her. He couldn't remember what year it was sometimes. He forgot that he was retired now. He called her late sometimes, wanting to know why she wasn't home from school. It didn't come to a head, though, until the police called her after he'd tried to go to work one morning at an office his company no longer owned. Emily had taken a break from school, but his decline had become a free fall. Gone was the loving man who had always been her strength and guidance. Her dad forgot who she was, calling her by her aunt's name more than hers, and fighting her over simple things as she tried to boss him around because she was older. Emily had been out grocery shopping when he had passed. In the end, dementia hadn't gotten him. He had hung himself in the living room for whatever reason, and the neighbors had called an ambulance when they saw him in the big bay window that looked out over the front lawn. Emily remembered that day as she took boxes out of her SUV. In retrospect, she should have known something was amiss. It was the first week of October, Dad's favorite month, and he had been doing a little better. He brightened up as they set up the Halloween decorations. Emily remembered him calling her kiddo again and ruffling her hair like he'd done when she was little. He'd been doing better. He'd seemed more lucid and more in the world. And on the day she'd gone out for groceries, he'd told her there was a program he wanted to watch and that he'd be okay. She thought about insisting, but decided it would probably be fine. She told him that she'd be right back, and when he told her that he loved her, she smiled for the first time in a while. When she'd gotten the call, she'd been unable to answer as she slid to the fetal position in the soup aisle of Publix. No one could have said why he had done it, but he was gone, all the same. Now she was left with nothing but a big empty house full of memories and questions. "Need a hand, Em?" Emily turned, knowing that voice. It was Glenn from across the street, and she shifted the box in her arms as she pointed back towards the SUV. Glenn was no spring chicken, but he gladly grabbed a couple of boxes and walked them into the house. "It's weird being in here without Frank," he commented, catching himself a moment later and apologizing. "I'm sorry, kiddo. I know that no one knows that better than you do." "It's okay," Emily said. He's at peace now. I know he hadn't been at peace for a while." Glenn set the box down in the living room, and as they went to get more, he commented that it was weird to see the yard so empty. "I don't think I've ever seen it lacking its usual ghosts and ghouls this close to Halloween." Emily nodded. "I know, but it seemed inappropriate to keep them up." She had taken them down the day of Dad's wake. Emily had returned from the wake, looked at all the tombstones and ghosts, and just couldn't take it anymore. She had taken it all down as the floodlights presided over the yard and just tossed it into the garage. If some of them broke, then that was just too bad. Emily had been happier for their passing once they had been put away, and she had gone to the funeral in a much better mood. "Think you might put 'em up again before Halloween?" Glenn asked. "Maybe," Emily said, but in her mind, she doubted it. It was 9 days till Halloween, and the last thing on Emily's mind was decorating the yard for a bunch of kids. Emily thanked Glenn for his help, and as the door closed behind her, all she really wanted to do was sleep. Just the act of moving her things in with the intention of staying was more than she could bear. She decided that tomorrow she would start moving her dad's things into the garage and putting her own stuff in the house. It would be hard, but she knew that it would go miles to making her feel better about staying here full time. As she had moved boxes into the living room earlier, she had smelled the Old Spice that her dad had always worn, and kept catching hints of old cigar smoke from his recliner. They were comfortable smells, smells from her childhood, but now they only filled her with unsurmountable sadness. As she snugged down in the guest bedroom, the place she'd been sleeping since she'd come back to live here, she hoped it would be easier as she cleaned out the old house. She hoped that maybe there would be some answers somewhere amongst Dad's old things as well. Emily was packing things into a box when she heard the knock on the front door the next day. It had been a rough morning, but Emily felt like she was making progress. The living room had been packed into two kinds of boxes, keep and donate. Most of Dad's stuff was going to be donated, his knickknacks not really fitting in with her stuff. The Billy Bass, the fishing trophies, and the last of Mom's Precious Memories figurines had gone into the donation box. But the pictures and some of the other things were staying. They looked a little odd next to Emily's things, her Funkos clashing with Dad's ceramic ducks. But some of these things were such a huge part of her childhood that she couldn't bear to get rid of them. The mallard with the green stripe was the one that she had painted herself, the one they had painted together, and the transition between Emily's childhood paintings and Dad's smooth brushstrokes were evident. She had cried over that duck, the plaster threatening to shatter as she clutched it to her chest. The duck's fragility had been saved by the knock on the front door. It was Glenn again, and Emily remembered that he'd agreed to take some of the boxes to the Salvation Army for her. When she opened the door, however, she was surprised to see that the Halloween decorations were again set up in the yard. "I'm glad to see you feeling better. I was surprised to see the yard set up again. Did you have a wild hare last night?" Emily looked out at the yard, but as she shook her head, Glenn must have realized that this wasn't her doing. Weird thing for kids to do. Can't imagine anyone on the block would just break into your garage and set up your Halloween decorations. He took the boxes and said he'd bring her a receipt, and Emily thanked him as she closed the door. With the door between her and the real world, Emily felt herself give in to the creeping sense of trespass. The whole thing freaked Emily out. She assured herself that she was making too much out of it, but she knew that she wouldn't be comfortable until the decorations were put away again. She set aside her unpacking as she cleaned up the ghosts and the gravestones, putting them in the boxes as she slid them into the crawl space over the garage. She must have been more tired than she thought last night to miss someone moving around outside all night. As she closed the little door in the ceiling of the garage, she wondered if maybe she should call the police. They had technically broken into her garage, though Emily doubted if it had been locked in the first place. She decided to let it slide this time and go back to setting up the living room. It was getting late, and she knew that soon her thoughts would be on dinner. When someone knocked the next day, Emily looked up from her lunch and found Glenn on the front porch again. She'd been too busy to check the lawn this morning, going straight to work on the kitchen as she moved in her appliances. And as she saw the tombstones and the ghosts had returned to their usual spot, she felt the dread rising in her throat. She was absolutely going to call the police this time. She had locked the garage, locked the crawl space with the padlock her dad had always used. If the kids dragged them out this time, it would qualify as breaking and entering. Glenn smiled as she opened the door, but he looked uncomfortable this time as he stood wringing his hat in his hands. He looked like someone delivering bad news, and Emily wasn't sure how much more bad news she could handle. "Hey there, Em. Just coming to make sure everything's okay." Emily thought about brushing him off, but decided to be truthful with him. "You know, Glenn, not really. Someone keeps breaking into my garage and setting up my Halloween decorations. I can keep a sense of humor about it, but it's getting harder and harder as time goes on." Glenn nodded. "I can imagine. I'll see if somebody has picked up anything on their cameras so we can see what's going on. Some of your neighbors, though, had mentioned something in the house. I know that people mourn in their own way, but just thought I'd make sure you were feeling okay." Emily gave him a questioning look as she grew tired of his beating around the bush. "Glenn, why don't you come out and say what's bothering you?" The old man looked a little offended, but he tried to brush off her briskness. "Someone said you had a silhouette in the front window of someone hanging. I like to think I know you better than that, but I know that grieving does weird things to people, and I just thought I'd come make sure you were okay." Emily gaped at him. "I can assure you, Glenn, I haven't had anything like that in my window. It's sick, and I would have thought you knew me better than that." Glenn and her father had been old friends since Dad had moved into the house, and Emily had grown up with Glenn's daughter and son. The families had been close, and Glenn had even come over to help her with her father a lot when he went downhill. For Glenn to ask her if she had done something like that was extremely hurtful, and he seemed a little more at ease by her answer. I told them they were wrong, but you wouldn't do something like that. I'll let you be, Em. I was just making sure everything was okay." Emily waited till he had gone back to his own house and went to take the decorations down again. She packed them into their boxes, bringing them inside as she put them in the coat closet. Let the kids look through the garage for them now. They wouldn't find anything, and maybe this would dissuade them from this little game. She wasn't sure why they had chosen her house for this anyway. Dad had been well loved by the kids in the neighborhood, and his house had been a mandatory stop for any kid looking for good candy. She thought again about calling the cops, but decided that hiding the decorations might be enough this time. She went back to sorting through the things, but she couldn't recapture the mood she'd left. She just kept going back to Busybody Glenn and the dumb kids who couldn't leave well enough alone, and she just got madder and madder the longer it went on. She finally tossed an old blender into the box, shattering the attached pitcher and growling as she went to get her keys. She was going out. She wanted to be anywhere but here. She climbed into her SUV, and as she looked back, she did a double take, unable to believe what she'd seen. It was only for a second, but she'd seen something swinging from behind the curtains in that second. It had been a man-shaped thing, hanging by the neck, but as she scanned every inch of the thick curtains, she couldn't find anything that looked anything like a swinging body. Maybe what Glenn had told her had gotten into her head, Emily thought, trying to put it out of her mind as she pulled out of the driveway. She came back after dark, having spent time with some college friends as she vented about the situation. They all agreed that it sounded terrible and thought Emily should have called the cops after the first time. Emily hadn't hung out with her friends like this for a while. Usually she was on a time limit and spent the whole time looking at her watch. It was nice not to constantly worry about her dad, but that made her feel guilty all over again. As her lights fell across the yard, she could see the Halloween decorations once again spread across it. Emily came angrily out of her car, taking 3 or 4 steps for the door, when the light in the living room suddenly came on. Emily felt her legs wobble ominously then. Behind the thick curtains, the lights, looking soft and inviting, was the silhouette of a swinging body. She stood there for a full 60 seconds, watching it slowly swing to and fro, and when the outline of the head seemed to turn in her direction, she loosed a loud scream and backpedaled. Emily stumbled back to her car, her legs feeling only about half under her control, and she drove her car halfway down the street before she took out her phone and called the police. They told her they'd be there in a few minutes, but when they asked if she felt safe going back to her house, she told them that she didn't and wanted someone to meet her down the street. They said they would, and when a blue and white drove past her, Another pulled up next to her to see if she was the caller. They questioned her about the break-in, but halfway through her statement, the officer radioed and told him to bring her home. "Is the residence secure?" the officer called, jotting some notes. "The residence is locked and shows no sign of entry. We need her to come let us in so we can search inside." "That's impossible," Emily breathed. I saw something hanging in the living room." The officer agreed to come back with her, and Emily tried not to hyperventilate as she drove home. Some of the neighbors had come out to see the show, and she could see Glenn peeking out of his window as she pulled back in and came shakily from her vehicle. The living room lights were off, and the house looked dark and brooding. Emily felt her eyes creeping to the window as she walked across the lawn. She opened the door with the key, letting the police go first as they searched the home. The house was just as she had left it. The living room was devoid of anything that could cast a shadow like that. Nothing was taken. No windows or doors were forced open. The only thing that had been moved were the decorations, and the police seemed disinterested in the whole thing. They left after searching the house, saying they would ask her neighbors if they'd seen anyone lurking around the home. As they pulled away, Emily stood in the yard and watched them go. She could feel the way her neighbors looked at her as they shuffled off to bed, and it felt like bees crawling on her skin. They thought she was making things up, playing it up for attention. But how could they think such a thing? She had cared for her dad for nearly a year, even sticking it out through the rough times. But it seemed that now the real horror had started. As they all went inside, the lights came on behind her, and the shadow cast across her was dreadfully familiar. Emily walked back to the car, called her friend Nina, and asked if she could stay with her. She would come back later for her things, but for the moment, Emily just wanted to go anywhere but here. Emily put the last of her boxes in the car and took one last look at her childhood home. The Halloween decorations were still there, looking a little windblown and lame next to the new addition to the yard. The realtor had been very interested in getting her hands on the house and saw no reason why it shouldn't sell quickly. When Emily told her about her father's suicide, the realtor told her it wouldn't stop most buyers. You'd be surprised how many people want to live in a possibly haunted house. The thought of selling the house made her deeply sad, but she hadn't even been able to come back until the sign was there. Nina had offered to come back with her, but Emily had said this was something she had to do on her own. Nina had said that she could live with her until she sold the house, her having just lost her roommate. Emily was happy for the invitation and had gone to the house early in the morning to get her things. Most of it was still packed in boxes, but she wanted a few things of her dad's that she had chosen to keep. The painted ducks, the family photos, the other things from her dad's room. The rest could be sold with the house for all she cared. It would likely raise the value of the place anyway, but she would have just as easily cut the price if they didn't want it. She heard the leaves crunch from the fence line and looked up to see Glenn walking over. "I'm just getting my things and leaving," she said, closing the door and standing her ground. "Good," Glenn said, his usual fatherly tone gone. "I think that would be best." Yeah, Emily thought. His messages had made that pretty clear. Glenn had been another part of the reason she hadn't been back. He had called her the day after, wanting to know why the police had been there and why she had left that awful thing in the living room. He'd been patient with her. They all had, but that thing was in poor taste and downright disrespectful to her father. When she hadn't returned his calls, he called the next day and told her that he was going to use his key and take the thing down, and that her father would be ashamed of her. It seemed that the neighbors had turned on her too, and now she was a social pariah. Good for them, Emily thought. She was leaving, so they could think what they wanted of her. "You planning on taking down the Halloween decorations before you go? I wouldn't want any of the local kids to accidentally wander over to your house expecting candy." She knew what he was referring to, but she didn't bite. "I paid the realtor extra to stage the house. I'm not coming back." Glenn nodded, clearly unhappy, as he turned to leave. Emily let him go, looking back at the house for a final time before leaving as well. Despite the hour, she could still see the slight outline that would haunt her dreams from behind those thick curtains that had graced the window since she was young. She'd been in the living room many times, trying to find anything that could have explained the shadow cast there, but there was nothing. It was as if that moment was frozen just behind the curtain, and if Emily could get beyond it, maybe she could save her dad before he took himself out of the disease's path. The realtor pulled in as Emily was looking at the house, smiling and waving as she told Emily the good news. "I've got 3 interested parties already. They love the neighborhood and can't wait to see the property. Looks like you might be shed of this place sooner than expected." Emily told her that sounded great. As she climbed behind the wheel, she watched as the realtor picked up the Halloween decorations and hastily tucked them under her arm. The for sale sign seemed to wave goodbye as she pulled out of the driveway for the final time. As she watched her clean up, Emily wondered how many times she would clean up those same decorations before finally leaving it up as a lost cause. She wondered how many times the neighbors would call her to complain about the decoration that she couldn't touch before she finally lost her mind. It seemed her dad's final legacy would be what swung beyond the veil, no matter what the neighbors thought. I suppose pretty soon it'll be time to trot out the Christmas stories again. There's nothing like a warm fire, though, to get me in the mood for Christmas time. I know all of you are looking forward to it as well, so I won't gild that particular lily too much, but I think there's something about horror and Christmas that just go hand in hand. I don't know if it's a tradition that you guys have continued, but my cousins and I used to tell ghost stories during parties and things. Just one of those traditions that I really hope has persisted in your family. It seems like it's time for another story from our mysterious travel writer. So, let's have a look at what happens when he goes into the Toymakers' woods. Some of you might remember me. I'm the traveling photographer who chases photos in strange locales. My story about the ghost grass hermit got the attention of a magazine that was interested in strange locales. It's not as much traveling as I'm used to, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't nice to sleep in a bed more than on the ground. I've spent the night in haunted hotels in Louisiana, shrieking forests in the Midwest, and looking for strange creatures in the various backwoods of the American South. So when I got the message about checking out a forest in Maine, I was a little hesitant. This time of year, the weather is likely to be frigid, and blundering into haunted woods in the middle of winter is no one's idea of a good time. The check the magazine was talking about writing me, however, was definitely a game changer. So I packed my stuff and headed out. I had time to read up on it while I flew from Tampa, skunk ape sighting had turned out to be a homeless guy, to Maine, the home of the king of horror, and some pretty picturesque scenery. The locals claim that the woods were home to some malevolent spirit, it seemed. A spirit who made toys. Local legend said that the people have been finding wooden toys in the woods for years, the first being reported in 1860. After 1850 or so, there was supposed to be an old man who lived in the woods out there. An old man who sometimes came into town to sell homemade goods. He had the usual fare, bowls and animals and things, but his puppets were supposed to draw buyers from far and wide. He made enough from his hand-carved goods to live comfortably away from society, and most people just believed he was a harmless old man. One winter, however, a group of kids went missing. The town turned out to try to find them, but as the snow came down and the hour grew late, hope seemed to dwindle that they'd ever be found. They asked the old man if he'd seen the missing kids, and he shook his head and told them he would keep an eye out for them. As the snow piled up and the winter wind whipped, the people in town began to wonder if he had maybe seen the kids and just wasn't saying. Someone said a few of the boys had been seen talking to him not long ago, admiring his puppets and hanging around his stand. They began to get a little stir-crazy, thinking about the boys and picturing all kinds of unnatural things he could be doing out there. So in the dead of winter, they had gone out and broken down the old man's door, handing out a savage beating and searching every nook and cranny for the missing kids. Except they never found any kids, and the beating they handed down had been a little too zealous. The old man was dead, and when the snows melted, the town found the kids in a snowdrift under a makeshift lean-to that they had used to get out of the snow. The townspeople sure were sorry about what they had done, but when they went to dig the old man up so they could bury him in the churchyard, his body was gone. They said they had glimpsed smoke coming up the chimney as well when they approached, and candles that suddenly went out when they knocked on the door. After that, the puppets had started appearing in the woods. Some people admitted to having hung them in memory of the old man and the terrible thing they had done to him, but some of them couldn't be accounted for by the mourners. People went missing every now and again, too, and some of the puppets began to look like the missing people. The forest had since been integrated into the state park, and the Toymakers' cabin was one of the park's landmarks. It had been well maintained, as had the surrounding woods, and lots of people came to see the Toymakers' woods. When my plane landed in Portland around 3.5 hours later, I was raring to have a look at the place. It was another 3 hours in a rental car from there, heading up into the heart of Maine as I followed the signs to a little town on the edge of the Maslow State Park called Bucklowder. They were pegged as one of those rustic tourist towns, kind of like Williamsburg, but with less PR. They had done okay, I suppose, and it was likely thanks in part to the people who came to write stories about them. I rolled in right around nightfall and found people in long skirts and buckle hats closing up shop for the night. The tourists had either gone somewhere else or had turned in for the night, and now the blacksmiths and the hunters and tanners could go home and watch TV and eat dinner and get some sleep so they could do it again tomorrow. The Hog's Mouth Inn was my destination, and I was glad to see it as I drove into the parking lot behind the building. The snow flurries had been coming down for the last 2 hours, and I was very glad I had thought to pack winter clothes when I left Florida, which had been a balmy 72 degrees when I got on the plane. The temperature gauge on my car said it was about 32 now, and the tourists were going to be in for a real winter scene tomorrow, I had no doubt. After checking in, I decided to come downstairs and have a look at their after-hours show. The bar area was a series of long tables where guests and actors ate by candlelight and paid a pretty penny for the ambience. The place had a pretty steep price tag for somewhere I was expected to sleep on a mattress I'd expect to see at a Howard Johnson and eat vegetable stew with a bunch of guys in rough-spun clothes. But the magazine was footing the bill for expenses, and I decided there would likely be no better place for getting local legends than right here in town. So I sat at the bar, ate some lukewarm stew, drank a watered-down beer, and asked the woman in the apron if she knew anything about the legend of the Toymakers' woods. Her eyes went wide, but it was clearly not the first time that she had been asked. "I wouldn't go out there if I was you. It's a haunted place, and it has a dark aura about it." "So I've heard," I said, setting down the glass and asking for another. "So does the old Toymaker still leave the puppets in the trees?" She didn't seem to like the question, but it was probably the accompanying smirk that set her off. That smirk tried to tell her that we both knew better. I was still pretty sure this was something the locals were doing to promote tourism at this point. An idea I wouldn't be divested of for a while yet. "He does, as I think you know. You think yourself witty by making fun of our local legends, but there are still some things in this world that can't be explained away so easily. You'd think that someone like yourself
someone who'd seen the unexplainable and lived to tell, would be a little more open-minded. I was speechless. Had she read my article? How do you know I've... It's plain to those who've lived in the shadow of strange and terrible things all their lives. Let's hope you'll come out of the woods as easily as you came out of whatever it was you ran afoul of before. I finished my second drink in silence, the barmaid moving to the other end of the polished wooden edifice and shooting dark looks at me until I left my money and took my leave. I woke up the next morning to find a winter wonderland outside and had to make a trip to the local outfitters before setting out. One pair of hiking boots, some snow pants, and several other warm bits of cover later, and I was off. The outfitter had also sold me a map of the area, which showed the start of the trailhead not too far from the edge of town. It took a little longer than I would have liked to find it in the snow, but I eventually oriented myself and found the Toymakers trailhead. The snow had turned the woods into a German fairy tale, and as I made my way down the snowy path, I couldn't help but feel a little like some peasant kid trying to find his way home. With all that colorless terrain surrounding me, it almost felt like I was back in the ghost grass again. The sign at the start of the path told me that it was about 3 miles to the Toymakers' cabin. Not a very strenuous walk in the summer or the spring, but in the snow, it would feel more like 5 or 6. The powder wasn't waist deep, of course, but I was keenly aware of the crunch, crunch, crunch of my new snow boots as I made my way towards the cabin. I had my camera out and decided to take a few pictures of the expansive winter landscape as I went. I saw signs of deer in the snow, some frozen pellets, probably left by a rabbit, and when I went to take a picture of some long plants jutting from a frozen icy pond, I saw the first of the puppets. I've been saying puppets, but I suppose what they were was marionettes. I inspected a few of them and found nowhere to put a hand to make the mouth move. They were sitting in trees, hanging from branches by their strings, some of them lying on the ground in a heap, but all of them looked meticulously crafted and expertly carved. They were dressed in all manner of outfits, but a lot of them looked like they might be wearing jogging pants or hiking clothes. Some of them were definitely children, and seeing them hanging merrily from the trees made me remember the story that I had read about this place. Walking through all this snow made me wonder if this was what the kids had experienced as they trudged through that same snow, cold and hungry, just trying to get home again. The farther I went, the more it seemed like I too could easily get lost out here. I was a tourist, but I could imagine that even the locals would be hard-pressed to find their way out of here. All this white, all this ice would cover up landmarks and make it that much easier to get turned around. You could blunder around out here for hours just trying to find the right trail, only to realize that you'd gone deeper into the woods instead of closer to town. The woods were made up of birches and spruces, hardy old pines, and the snow bothered them not at all. They hung close together, bearing the weight of all that powder stoically, and amongst the limbs were the puppets that I had come to see. Always those infernal puppets. When it began to get dark, I realized that I'd been wandering this trail for hours. It had been early morning when I left, 8 or 9 at the latest, and as I watched the sun begin to dip a little, I started getting worried that I was lost. The map I had did very little to help. The area was unknown to me, and the landmarks that would have meant something to the locals were just so much snow-covered nothing. I still hadn't come to the Toymakers' cabin, and with every step I was less sure that I would ever find it. It was 3:30 by my watch when I noticed the smoke curling up on the horizon, and I headed towards it like a dying man towards rescue. I had hoped it was someone's chimney in town, but the closeness of the trees made me think it might be the cabin that I'd been looking for. The thought that somebody had hiked out here at first light to pretend to be some creepy toymaker made me want to applaud his resilience, but I was hoping that he had a snowmobile or something to get back to town.
Hell, I would settle for a guide to find my way back to the trailhead at this point. Whoever was up here likely knew the way out at any rate, and I was cold and soaked enough to want to get back somewhere warm. My hands shook a little as I came up to the cabin, my camera coming up as I clicked a few pictures of the Darkwood dwelling. It was a single-room cabin, nothing fancy by today's standards, but it was long and likely contained a loft above the floor. I could just imagine the workshop that must exist inside there, the tables and benches that held the creations, the wonders that he would create there, and suddenly I wanted to see it. I went right on wanting a peek until my knock was answered by something from a nightmare. The door opened with a long and ominous creak, and inside was less than inviting. The shadows weren't particularly long outside, but the inside of the workshop was pitch black. The face that leered out had an unsettlingly toothy grin to go along with its cold red eyes. Its body was undeterminable, the dark hiding it like a cloak, but its face loomed down at me like a jack-o'-lantern from a high shelf. He grinned at me from a space near the top of the door, and I felt my lower lip tremble a little as his eyes fell on me.
"Well, hello, traveler. You look cold. Would you like to come inside and sit by the fire?"
Its voice sounded like an echo from the pits of hell, but that wasn't what had decided me on backing away from the invitation. When the door had opened, a smell like wet copper had nearly bowled me over. It was a smell like blood, and I knew that if I went into that house, I would never come out again. No, thank you," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I was just wondering which way would get me back to town."
"That way," it said,
and I assumed it must have pointed.
"I'd walk with you, but I can't abide the light. It hurts my eyes, you see. If you'd like to wait until the sun sets, however, I'd be happy to walk you back to town."
I shook my head. "No, thank you. My friends are waiting for me, and I must be going."
"Of course. Hurry along now."
As it closed the door, the portal creaked on swollen hinges, but not loud enough for me to hear it whisper,
"Wouldn't want you to be caught out after dark, now would we?"
I ran as fast as I could, using the puppets as a guidepost. Suddenly their height in the tree made sense. This thing had been crouching to talk to me, and I bet its arms would have no trouble placing those puppets in the boughs of the nearby firs. They seemed to taunt me as I ran, enticing me to hurry. The sun might keep it inside for now, they seemed to say through their painted smiles, but what will happen when it goes down? I haven't been so afraid since I lay on the floor of the hermit's shack, listening as I wondered if he would kill me. I ran as the sun set, and fate must have been with me that day. The journey that had taken me all day seemed to end in a few minutes, and I could soon see the town in profile as the sun set behind it. I raced the shadows into town, expecting to hear a howl or a scream as the darkness allowed him to leave his den, and as I closed the door of the inn behind me, I saw the patrons at the bar looking up questioningly. The barmaid, however, seemed to know exactly what had happened. As I came to rest at the bar, snow falling off my clothes, she set a mug of something hot down in front of me. Her look was knowing, like she had guessed what had happened, but it also looked sympathetic, like she understood what I had been through. It was pretty clear that she too had been to the cabin and possibly even seen something that haunted her to this day. "Don't worry, it doesn't come into town. Never has, not since our great-great-great-grandsires kicked in its door and murdered it for a crime it had no part of. It's called the Toymakers' Woods for a reason, and that's where it hunts its prey." I nodded, taking a sip of the mead she put down in front of me. It was warm and thick and good.
"How many have gone missing in those woods?" I asked. Not really sure I wanted the answer. "Not so many as you might think. Enough that the Forestry Service goes out with dogs a few times a month, but never after dark. It prefers to take locals if it can. It remembers that the townspeople are responsible for its suffering, and it means to exact revenge a drop at a time. To its credit, it probably kills as few tourists as it can. Tourists are usually noticed when they go missing. The locals know to stay out of the woods or to accept the dangers of going in." I stayed in Bucklowder for a few days, the snowdrifts making me afraid to take my rental car back on the road. By the time the snows began to recede some, I had a great article full of Bucklowder's history and lore. My editor loved it, my readers loved it, and it definitely made an impression on yours truly. I had a little more respect for local color after that, though it certainly didn't stop my editor from sending me to strange and interesting places. I'm sure you'll hear from me again sometime, but until then, remember to trust that funny feeling you get sometimes when you're out on the trail or hiking in an unfamiliar area. It just might save you from becoming part of a local legend yourself.
Fire's really going now. Might be time to take off my blanket and just stick my toes a little bit closer to the fire. Nothing like warm toes on a cold day to make you feel really cozy. We've all seen the signs around. No trespassing, one way, stop, all the classics. But sometimes it's best to heed those signs, especially when they warn you to beware of dog.
It should have been an easy score. Rob an old man, leave without much fuss. We never could have guessed how south it would go. Everyone had heard of Duncan Adams. He'd been a fixture in the community for generations, living in that wild old house up on Mount Yaller. He'd been a writer, a professor of antiquities at Georgia State College, and any number of other things. His house was supposed to contain all sorts of expensive things, and we were going to see if the rumors were true. Mike didn't like it, though. Guy like that is certain to have all sorts of security, the best measures money can buy, and you just expect the four of us to walk in like it's nothing. Julius, Gavin, Mike, and I like to call ourselves a crew, but that was just from watching too many heist movies. In reality, we were just four guys who like to break into people's houses and steal things. We weren't druggies, we weren't criminals, despite what our records said, but we did like to buy nice things, and stealing often paid for them better than a real job. You'd think so, I said, but my brother went up there to do a job and said that there were no security systems, no cameras, no nothing. The dude is just asking to get robbed, and I say we take him up on it. My youngest brother's a plumber, and that was actually where I got the idea for the job. He got called about a month ago to fix some pipes in the old man's bathroom, and came back to tell us how cool the place was. He had all these mirrors on the grounds, and in the house, and on the walls, and it was like a fun house. It was really cool looking, he said. The old man had paid him a mint to do the job, and I'd spent the next 3 weeks thinking about that house, and planning the biggest heist that I could imagine. The plan is that we go in just after dark and jump the sidewall. We can go in through the garden out back, and come out on the back porch and into the house. The old man's a hard sleeper. My brother said he had to ring the bell a dozen times before he woke up. We can go in and out before he even knows we're there, and live like fat rats off the spoils. Mike still wasn't sure, but greed was slowly eroding his sense of self-preservation. He said he would bring it to a vote with the rest of the crew, and later that afternoon he called to say that the vote had been carried unanimously. The other two were in, and Mike wasn't about to hold us up with some tickling feeling of doubt. Hope your intel's right, 'cause if you're not, we're all going to be royally screwed. And that was how we came to be hunkered in the scrub around the Duncan Adams estate, waiting for it to get good and dark. We were all dressed in dark clothes, Jules and Gavin wearing ski masks, while Mike and I just had our hoods pulled up. I was pretty sure that we wouldn't need cover, but Jules had 2 prior arrests, and
Gavin was clean for the moment. Both wanted to stay out of prison, if they could help it, and had opted to cover their faces. As the dark began to settle around us, we kept to the fence and prepared to vault over. It was just a simple concrete wall, no lights or cameras on the top. But Mike stopped before making a stirrup with his hands to point at a sign on the wall. You didn't say nothing about a dog. I looked at the sign, wrinkled my brow as I tried to remember if Lewis had mentioned a dog. He hadn't. He'd said nothing about any kind of animals on the property, but a dog could complicate things. The sign was the usual black and yellow one that bore the legend, "Beware of dog," on it, but it looked a little faded, and I suddenly wondered if it was something from a while ago. It's probably old. Lewis didn't say anything about a dog or a cat or anything to do with animals. Mike seemed unsure, but I doubled down. Tell you what, I'll go first and drop behind the gate. If there's a dog, it'll just tear me up, and I'll find some way to get out, or you guys can run. We'll only be out for the gas it took to get us here, and I'll have spent a night in jail, worst case scenario. Mike still looked unsure, but he made a stirrup with his hands, and I vaulted over the wall and landed in a well-kept backyard. It had been landscaped to look oriental, maybe Japanese or something, and there was a bridge over a little creek and a well-cared-for walkway that led to the back of the house. There was a sand pit with rocks in it, some trees cut to resemble bonsai trees, and several large reflective columns interspaced around. It was definitely different, but I liked it the longer I stood waiting to get mauled by a Rottweiler or a pit bull. "What do you see?" Mike whispered, as I scanned the area for a slobbering beast that was just waiting to strike. "Nothing. Well, not nothing, but no dog. Come on over. I think it's safe." They dropped over one at a time, Mike reaching back to pull Gavin over before landing himself. They all stared at the strange little garden, so alien in the twilight, and when no lights came on to mark them, and no dog came out to chase us away, we all sighed collectively. "Looks like there wasn't a dog after all," Julia said. "Or he's inside," Mike said skeptically. "Whatever. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We gotta get inside first," I reminded them, as we set off across the little garden path. It was a little eerie to walk across the shadowy garden, with only the moon to guide us. The place seemed to be made of strange angles, and the reflective monoliths didn't help matters much. They were everywhere, a new one jutting up every 7 or 8 feet, and they played strange games in the moonlight. I would catch myself looking at them out of the corner of my eye, and more than once I had to turn and make sure something wasn't following us. The reflections created strange shadows, and I was sure I saw something dart out of sight before turning to find nothing and nowhere that it could have gone. "These things are weird," Julia said, keeping his voice pitched low. "I could swear I keep seeing something in them, but it's gone when I look." "Me too," Gavin said, sounding a little unnerved. "Eyes on the prize, boys," I reminded them, but I didn't sound as sure as I tried to convey. The backyard hadn't looked very big, but as we moved towards the house, it seemed to go on forever. We were staying low, trying not to draw attention to ourselves, but it seemed like we should have been there by now. Whenever I looked at the back porch, it always seemed to be about 50 feet away, and every step seemed to bring us no closer. "What the hell was that?" Gavin asked, and his voice was too high. Julia shushed him, whispering back, "What are you talking about?" "There it was again, right there, I saw it," Gavin said, pointing at one of the polished monoliths. I glanced at it, but it was just a flat reflection of the weird trees sitting on the back wall. "There's nothing there, Gav. Get it together, man. In a few hours we'll be leaving with more loot than we can carry. Then you can freak out if you still want to." Gavin looked unsure, but he nodded and kept pace as we made our way through the collection of old trees and topiaries. He wasn't the only one getting a little nervous, though. I could see something in those reflections, too. Something I was beginning to think might be our dog. It was big, way too big to go vanishing like it always seemed to. It was a mastiff or a wolf hybrid or something, and the longer we trekked through the garden, the closer it seemed to get to us. At first it was just curiously observing us, seeing what we were doing and enjoying its little game of startling us. As we neared the house, though, the game changed. Now it was getting closer to our group, weaving between the statues and plants, getting bigger as it stalked us. I still wasn't sure how it was doing that. The thing had to be nearly 5 feet tall on all fours, but it would disappear any time I turned to look behind me. I wondered if there was some sort of electrical gadget in these things, maybe a display mount to scare intruders, but when I looked right at the polished mirror front, I saw nothing but my own reflection and the larger-than-usual bonsai topiary behind me. I'd like to tell you that we made it to the house before things went sideways, but that's not true. Truth was, we never even saw the inside of the house. We came within about 10 feet of the back porch, a trip that seemed to take longer than it should have when the purpose of the monoliths became apparent. We were hunched around some of the oddities of the garden, trying to get our nerve up before heading in. Gavin and I weren't the only ones that had been seeing things out of the corner of our eyes, and nerves were high as the goal came into view. Now the real work would begin, but we weren't sure what to expect from this funhouse garden. Would we be allowed to make it to the house? Would we be mowed down by some huge hound on our way to the porch? I didn't know, but suddenly this didn't seem like the easy score I had promised them. "Jules," I whispered, "go see if the back door is unlocked." "Why have I got to do it?" Jules asked, his nerves jangling a little. "'Cause you're the closest to the door. Just get up there and see." Jules looked at the house like it was the absolute last place he wanted to go, but greed still had its teeth in him. We could still make something of this, still come out okay, and he scampered up the porch steps with all the stealth he could muster. The doors were glass, fronting on a huge glassed-in kitchen, and when Jules reached out for the handle, he seemed as shocked as we were when it pulled down easily. Damn, guy's not even... But as he took his eyes off the glass, I saw something loom up behind him, something that made me tremble. It was the dog, a huge black hellhound with a gaping maw full of sharp teeth and piercing red eyes. It was behind the glass, and I thought for sure that it would jump through and bury Jules with its bulk. I started to yell, started to warn him, but when it leaned out of the glass and snapped its teeth around him, I was surprised by the lack of a crash. Jules looked surprised too, his shock absolute, and when the creature yanked him into the glass and out of sight, we were left in stunned silence, with only the crickets for company. "What the hell was that?" Gavin said, his voice trembling audibly. "I don't know," Mike said, his voice inches behind me as he inched away with every breath, "but I'm not sticking around to find out." He was off and running then, tearing back towards the wall we'd come over. He looked scared enough to jump it without any help, and when I called for him to stop, I winced as a light came on in the house. Great, we'd woken up the old man. Gavin saw the light and took a few steps back himself, but when Mike screamed suddenly, Gavin and I froze as we turned back to see what had happened. In the fleeting rays of the porch light, I saw Mike caught beneath the massive paws. It was coming from the surface of a polished square, and as the head emerged, the beast looked as big as a grizzly bear. The fur was wiry and stiff, something I believe they called brindled in the dog world, and its muzzle was already dripping with blood. It bent down over Mike, the poor guy screaming and thrashing as much as his smushed lungs would allow, and when it covered his head with its mouth, the crying and yelling was cut off abruptly. It took Mike's head with it, but was nice enough to leave the body behind as it disappeared into the polished surface of the brooding rectangle. Gavin and I just stood there for a minute, unsure of what to do. When the door to the back porch opened, we both got low as we tried to hide from whoever had come to check on the ruckus.
"Who's there?"
said a voice that had probably once been a little more impressive. Age had done it no favors, and now it was a little less impressive, a little less commanding. But the owner seemed to know that he wasn't the most dangerous creature in the garden. The sound of a cane thumping on the boards could be heard, and when he saw the body, he croaked out a rough laugh.
"Decided to come and steal from an old man, huh? You didn't think you were the first, did you?"
I looked at Gavin as we hid, trying to tell him to be still, though he seemed to be losing that particular fight.
"More than a few people have thought that they could come and plunder what I've rightfully taken in my prime. They see an old man living alone and think to make his home their find of the century. They never guess that the most dangerous thing here might be my own biggest find."
As we watched, the old man put out a hand, and the hellish beast stuck its nose out of the window it had sucked jewels into, so the old man could scratch it like any other dog.
"I was excavating a tomb in Russia when I found them. These strange black monoliths were just in a cave towards the back of the old tomb. I had never seen anything like them or the beast they held, but it had enough intelligence to understand me when I made it an offer. It didn't seem to be enough that he was going to kill us. The old codger meant to monologue before his hell beast devoured us. 'Come back to my home,' I said. 'Come into the lighted world again, and I will take you from this place and let you hunt my enemies for me.' And so I have. It has hunted a long time on would-be thieves and robbers, and eaten well in the process. You will be no different."
Gavin looked at the back wall, a path that would take him over the unmoving corpse of Mike, and seemed to be trying to decide if it was worth the risk. I shook my head at him, trying to tell him not to, but when he suddenly sprinted across the lawn, I found myself right behind him. I could no more stop myself from fleeing in my terror than he could, and we dodged around the monoliths at every opportunity. The hound lunged at us nonetheless, coming out of either side as it tried to stop us. We were neck and neck, nearly to the wall, when Gavin suddenly tripped. I looked back and found that Gavin's foot was stuck in a trap too devilish to escape. The creature had him by the ankle, and as it dragged him backwards, I sprinted for the wall and leapt at the top. My fingers burned as they tried to dig into the concrete, and I'm not ashamed to say that I left a few fingernails behind as I scrambled over the top. I drove home, expecting that the creature or the police would come after me every mile of the way. When it didn't come lunging out of my rearview mirror and no blue and whites dogged my heels, I breathed a sigh of relief. I drove home, locked all the doors in my trailer, and went to my room so I could write this down while it's still fresh. Now that I have, I'm not sure what to do. Do I call the police? What would I even tell them? Can that thing get me through my own mirror? My computer monitor? The surface of my spoons? I don't know what to do. But I do know one thing. If you ever hear of Duncan Adams and his strange house in the mountains, and think that an old man living alone will be an easy score, think again. The dog that he has can't be bribed with treats and pets, and all you'll have from that place is death for you and anyone who comes along with you. I think there's just enough time and wood left in the fire for one more story before it's time to say goodbye again. We've all gotten some weird emails from now and again. Strange offers for stranger drugs, employment offers that go nowhere, maybe even some strange correspondence from a certain prince overseas. But When you get an email that's too good to be true, sometimes it's exactly what it's offering, and sometimes that offer is even worse than you might imagine. So, let's hear a story about a strange email. An email from Mazer Inc.
The job was too good to be true. I understand that now. The message had popped up in my inbox like 1,000 before it. It sat nestled between a buy Viagra online and a congratulations, you've just win a free iPad email. But as I hovered my mouse over it, I found myself intrigued by the tagline. I could usually spot spam messages, even the ones my inbox seems incapable of catching. This one, though, something about it caught my eye. The spelling and grammar were on point, and something about it just screamed attention. I moved my cursor over the box and hovered it over the email. Preparing to break the cardinal rule, I read the title one more time. Mazer Inc. seeking subjects for free at-home testing. I clicked it, and a very official-looking email informed me that I had been randomly selected to take part in a clinical trial. The email detailed the parameters for this test, the time frame for the test, and the payment method for completion of the test. The parameters were basically A. Take the required supplement they sent you with breakfast and dinner. B. Sign on and watch a series of videos every day for 2 hours. They would involve color patterns, pictographs, and several other standard mental tests. And C. You wear the required Mazer Inc. monitor device while I slept so they could monitor my brain activity and the effects of the supplement. For the price they were quoting, it sounded like a great job. I'd have been a fool not to look into it. I looked the company up online first. It's pretty easy to see which companies are scams these days and which are legit. Mazer Inc. was a publicly traded company, and they did a lot of business in pharmaceuticals and healthcare. They had a few squibs in the news about questionable business practices, but who didn't these days? At the end of the day, they looked on the level, so I applied to their email, thinking I'd never hear back from them again. The return email came a few hours later, thanking me for agreeing to the trial and saying they would ship out my initial package and my initial payment the same day. 3 days later, there was a brown cardboard box on my front doorstep from Mazer Inc., the logo stamped prominently across the side of the box. I hadn't expected it so soon, but the extra money was a nice bonus. Most of my work has been from home these days, and the little bit of it that I was getting was barely keeping the lights on and the rent paid. COVID was still making working in an office difficult, and in these troubled times, every little bit helped. I opened the box and found 8 bottles of something called Neuro Boost. They came in standard 120 capsule bottles and looked perfectly normal, just like something you'd buy at CVS. The monitor turned out to be something similar to an Apple Watch. It had a shiny black band and a smart little face that displayed heart rate, blood pressure, and other general health statistics. I slipped it on, but was confused when I didn't see anywhere to charge it. I shrugged, figuring maybe the internal batteries would last a while. There was also a check stapled to a set of instructions telling me how to get onto the Mazer Inc. website so that I could take my daily mandatory testing. For the amount they were paying, it seemed like a pretty sweet deal if all I had to do was watch a few videos and take some pills and watch the movies for 2 hours a day. When I got up the next morning, there was a bright display on the front of the watch reminding me to take my pills and do my training. So I got up and made some breakfast, took my pills, and got ready for my day. The pills were oily and gave me some fairly rancid burps, but they weren't too bad. When the watch reminded me at noon that I needed to take my training for the day, I sat down at my computer and got to it. The videos were mostly a series of color patterns, flashing in quick succession, as well as a series of brain games that had me doing math or solving puzzles. I guess the pills were supposed to boost my cognitive functions, and I wanted to see if it had affected my scores on the games as badly as the text did. If it did, I couldn't tell. And after my mandatory 2 hours, I closed it up and opened my work folder to see if there was anything new from the office. For the next couple of weeks, everything was fine. I took my pills twice a day, did my mandatory testing, and wore my armband religiously. I found that I liked having it on after a while. It was very comfortable, and being able to glance down and look at my vitals was kind of nice. I've never really had the money for fancy tech, so having something that sort of looked like fancy tech was nice. At the time, I would have told you everything was fine for about the first 2 weeks. But after a few days, I began to notice some strange things around my apartment. It was subtle stuff at first. Things moved, items missing that reappeared a few days later, but it was something more subtle than that as well. Sometimes it felt like someone else had been in my apartment. But that was crazy. The chain was always on, the door was always locked, and, at least to my knowledge, I was the only one that had been in my house since about a week before the quarantine. I thought at the time that I was just being neurotic. But now that I look back on it, I'm pretty sure there was more to it than I was picking up on. The first real sign came to me while I was watching the color patterns one day. I'd been taking the pills for about 2 weeks when one day I watched the colors go from quick flashes of green and blue and yellow and saw a picture. It was just for a second, nothing really substantial, but it looked like a street. It wasn't a street that I knew, and it looked as though it had been torn up by something. I didn't get a good look at it. It was only a flash for a second, but I had to double take to see if I had actually seen what I'd seen. I kept a closer eye on them from then on, but I didn't see anything else that day. The program moved on to math problems a few seconds later, but I never quite forgot about that picture for the rest of the day. That's probably why I remembered it later. I was scrolling through Facebook later, just getting ready to drop off, kind of checking it over without really reading anything, when a friend's post jumped out at me. He was ex-military and he was talking about an attack in Kabul that day, talking about how the military needed to do more or something, when the same street appeared in his picture. It had been the site of a bombing, and the street was destroyed, just as I'd seen it earlier. I sat dry-mouthed for a minute, just mulling it over in my head. The longer I did, the more I kind of began to make excuses for it. It was very strange, but I eventually chalked it up to similarities. I hadn't actually seen that particular street. I was just seeing it now and associating it with what I'd seen earlier. There was no way I had seen the site of an attack before it had even happened. It just wasn't the sort of thing that normal people did. I turned my phone off and rolled over, going to sleep as I told myself it had never come up again. The next day, however, I woke up and found that my shoes were missing. It wasn't like they were expensive or anything, just a pair of Walmart New Balances, but it was the fact that they were missing that confused me. I'd set them beside the door 4 days ago when I'd last left the house. There was no reason in the world that they should be gone, but they were. I could still see the mud from the running track on the carpet by the door, the only proof that they'd been there at all. I searched the house, thinking maybe I'd just put them down somewhere and forgotten about it, but they were nowhere to be found. That made me worried, but again, I put it out of my mind. I was just going stir-crazy from the quarantine, that was all. I just needed to get out more. I'd been taking the pills for about a month when I started seeing more pictures. It happened suddenly. 1 minute I was seeing red and yellow and blue and purple go by, and the next second they were solidifying into pictures. A Walmart somewhere, a Jeep out in the desert, a shoe left on a beach, a bunch of sunflowers, on and on and on. The colors were gone. I never saw them again. From then on, it was just random pictures. I called the number on the back of the bottle after reading it over to see if there were any side effects. After finding the helpline, the one that says to call if you have any adverse reactions, I waited for the robot call to cease and for a person to pick up. To my surprise, someone picked up right away, and I was spared the indignity of wading through the muck. The lady in customer service listened to what I had to say, took down my employee ID, and told me that this was completely normal. She told me that lots of people reported the colors becoming pictures. It was actually very common to get these sort of calls. She said that if it became anything worrisome, to let them know, but seeing the pictures was completely natural. I hung up, feeling a lot better. I kept feeling better until that night. Until I woke up in the middle of my living room with no earthly idea how I'd gotten there. I had my hand wrapped around the doorknob, and I was fully dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. I was wearing a pair of black boots that I didn't recognize, and I had my car keys in my hand. I'd clearly been going somewhere, but I had no memory of deciding to leave. I'd been getting ready for bed the last I remembered, easing under the covers and just getting snug down for the evening. I remembered falling asleep, though I clearly didn't remember waking back up. I sat up for the rest of the night, a cup of coffee in hand to make sure that I didn't try to slip off and sleepwalk somewhere. I had never had a history of sleepwalking, but I'd heard that people could pick it up later in life. Sleep dressing yourself and sleep driving were something I'd never heard of, but I suppose anything was possible. That day I went out and bought a stopper to put under the door. I bought a flipper lock and installed it myself. I would have put a second deadbolt on as well if I hadn't rented the apartment. I thought if I made it more difficult for myself to leave, I might not sleepwalk outside. If I wanted to blunder around my apartment, that was one thing. Going out with no memory of the outside was another, especially if I'd been intending to drive. I had been taking the pills for about 2 months at this point, but I never equated them to what was going on. I think maybe I just didn't want to. I liked the way they made me feel, and I especially liked the extra money I was getting every month for taking them. Some of the pictures I'd been seeing had come up again. The shoe on the beach had turned out to be a little card from a plane crash over Spain. The Walmart had been celebrating its 20-year anniversary when someone had driven a car through the festivities. I had stopped really looking for them anywhere. I didn't really want to know what they were. I had my own problems to worry about. I'd woken up several times since the first night, standing in different rooms and having no clue how I'd gotten there. I woke up in the kitchen, toast burning in the toaster. I shook awake in the shower, fully clothed as the water fell over me. I came to on the floor of my living room with my legs under the couch, and I awoke several times as I fumbled at the lock on my apartment. Whatever was happening to me, my body seemed to be trying to keep me from hurting myself, and for that I was pretty grateful. I think my body knew the pills were doing something strange to me, but my brain was trying its best to justify the actions. It seemed like my brain might be keeping secrets from the rest of us, secrets that I would find out pretty soon. Then one day, I woke up somewhere different. I woke up as I was standing in a factory, preparing to break a tank full of cloudy liquid with a fire axe. I dropped the axe that I'd been preparing to shatter the glass with and looked around in confusion. Where the hell was I? How had I gotten here? I looked around and could see other people causing general destruction as well, but they didn't seem to have come to like I had. They were destroying lab equipment, factory equipment, and anything else they could get their hands on. They were like a group of mindless ants, swarming over everything they couldn't destroy themselves and wrecking it with sheer numbers. I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew I had to get the hell out of there. No one came to stop me as I ran, so I took off and didn't stop running till I was outside. Turned out I was actually somewhere I knew. I'd been inside the Terminus Chemical Building. I'd seen the building many times from the freeway, but I'd never actually been inside it. I had a vague idea of what they did, medical research or chemical trials or something, but I couldn't have told you why I'd been there destroying things. I started moving, making my way for the freeway, and when I got there I managed to thumb a ride and get back to the general vicinity of my apartment. It was the middle of the night when I got out of the building, and the sun was just starting to get up when I got home. For the next 3 days I stayed inside and strapped myself into bed every night. I stopped taking the pills and stopped logging onto the website for my daily training. It appeared that I might have lost my monitor while I was busily destroying the factory, but I was honestly glad to have it off me. My phone rang a few times from unlisted phone numbers, but I never picked them up. I was done taking their drugs and being their guinea pig, if that's all I was. On the 3rd day, someone knocked on the door. After a few minutes of peeking through the peephole, I opened it slowly and glanced mousily through the crack. The monitor was on the front mat, sitting like a bomb on the rough fibers. On top was a note, my name written on the back of a folded Polaroid. I reached for it, not wanting it, but needing to see it. The picture was no grainy Polaroid, but a highly detailed photo of me as I smashed a tank of cloudy liquid with the axe I'd swung that night. On the picture was a little caption that read, "Can you see any colors in this picture? Take your pills, do your training, put on your monitor, and get back to work, lest we send this picture to the police and let them know what you've been up to on your nightly excursions."
I think that's just about all for today. Thanks for joining me again by the fire for another bout of cozy horror with me, Dr. Plague. I do hope to see you again tomorrow and every day after that for more great stories and more great company. Till then, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful day and a spooky evening.